Welcome to the pattern for the Slouchy Beanie hat. This is the second level of our knitting, learning how to knit. It's the practice stage where you will be practicing lots of things that you learnt how to do in the starting out stage. So let's have a little look at the wool we're using. We're using Aran wool. And as you can see, it's a flecked one, so it will give a really lovely effect to the finished hat, make it look quite rustic, if that's the right word. I'm not sure it's the right word, but anyway, it will look lovely. I've chosen to do it in a very pale mauve. There are lots of other shade and colour combinations that you can have. Aran is in between double knit and chunky, so it's quite a thick wool. Your knitting will grow quite quickly, and this wool is a combination of wool and acrylic. Wool for the natural fibres and the natural feel that it gives, and acrylic because it is much harder wearing. It will make it makes it easier to care for, so something you can stick in the washing machine, and also it brings down the cost of the garment quite a lot. So first things first, open up the wool as normal, find the end. Remember, it's usually tucked in one end. There it is, there's our end, and take the needles out of the packet. So we're starting off with using the smaller needle, the 3.75 mil needle, and these come with already with a needle to sew together with inside. You won't need that very much at all though for this garment, because actually the way you knit it pulls it together. So we're going to lie 1.20 meters for casting on, because it is quite a small needle that we're working on, so 1.20 meters should be plenty. So just like normal, I'm not going to be labouring this point because you should have learnt how to cast on with the starting out step, but yarn around your finger, pull the loop off your finger, push the yarn through, so you've made a slip stitch, and put it on the needle, and then you cast on. So remember, yarn around your finger, twist your finger, needle through the yarn, and do a stitch. Yarn around your finger, twist your finger, needle through the yarn, and do a stitch. So we're always doing the stitch using the wool from the ball, and the bit that goes around your finger is the 1.20 meters that you've already measured out. So you've got to cast on 96 stitches. You again using a circular needle. Circular knitting for hats is amazing because you actually make the hat without any seam on it. You don't have to worry about sewing it together at the end, and you've just got a tiny bit like at the top of the hat at the crown to sew in, so it's very, very quick. So put on 96 stitches, cast on 96 stitches, and I will then show you how we're going to knit the rib at the bottom of the hat. So just like we've always done before, remember to keep counting as you're knitting. So particularly when you're casting on, so that you know you've got the right number of stitches. And so counting in tens, as we've said before, always works. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Put my finger there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Put my finger there. 1, 2, 3. So another 73 for me to do. So to get up to 96, so if you notice that mine's starting to come off the end of the actual hard bit of the needle onto the wire part of the circular needle, and that's absolutely fine. That's how it works with this. So keep going until you've got on your 96. So I've cast on my 96 stitches. As you know, the best thing to do is to check you've got 96 stitches by counting before you start sewing. So I've already done this, but you count in tens just like I showed you just now when I had less stitches on here, just to make sure that you have got 96. Because if you haven't, you will struggle once you start setting the pattern. So I'm going to go through, I've already gone through mine. So the next thing I'm going to do is my end that's left from casting on. I'm just going to tidy this away. So fold it in half again if you've got enough, and then just put a loose knot in this. With this, you won't actually be using it. We'll just tuck this away somewhere in a moment. I'll show you where we're going to do that in a moment. So I can see very clearly that this is the yarn that I'm knitting with, the yarn that's coming from the ball, and I don't need that end. So what I'm going to do now is the end of the cast on, which has got the yarn attached to it, is going to be the end that I knit with always, and the other end is going to be the one that I knit from. And because I'm right-handed, the one that does the hard work is in my right hand, and the one which is got the easier job is in my left. So the one that does the knitting is in my right hand. You might have it the other way around. So first thing is make sure that your cast on is evenly spaced along the needle. So I'm pushing it up onto the needle at the other end, because our first job is to start knitting in the round, okay, which means to join it here. So the two sides of the wall are going to join, so we've got a circle that we're knitting in a circle. Okay, that's why we're using circular needles. Can use it for other reasons, but that's why we did it. But before we even start knitting, the cast on edge, make sure it's in the same place all the way around the needles. I tend to have it on the top so that I can see exactly where it is all the way along. So you will have learned how to do knit and purl in our starting out patterns. If you've used those, you need to be able to know how to do knit and purl to do this pattern. We're going to be doing rib to start with. It's single rib, so we'll be knitting one stitch, purling one stitch, knitting one stitch, purling one stitch, all the way around. But rather than just an ordinary knit stitch where we go up through the stitch so the needle goes to the back of the other needle and around, we're going to be doing something called knitting through the back of the loop, and it twists the stitch and it makes a much more defined rib pattern. It does look really lovely and it's worth the effort, and it's not that difficult. Once you know how to knit, it's easy. So you still keep your wool behind the knitting needle, but this time, rather than going through the front of the stitch, we're going through the back of the stitch. So my needle is still going behind this needle, but rather than going that way through, it's going that way through, and we still knit. So I knit that one, and this one, don't forget, I've also joined the circle together. So I've knitted one stitch, then just do an ordinary purl. So purl, go down through the stitch. If you look, I brought the wool around to the front of the needle. I go down through the stitch, I put yarn around, pull my needle back and up, and then there's a purl stitch. Then to knit the stitch, take my yarn to the back. Don't forget, I'm not going up through the front, I'm going up through the back of the stitch, yarn around from the back, and knit that stitch. So to purl again, yarn around to the front, I go down through the stitch, yarn around, pull it back gently and up. Don't forget, I'm just pulling gently on this. I'm not holding it too tight. It's just tight enough, but not too tight. We did a lot of work on this in the starting out patterns, but don't hold it too tight. Otherwise, you'll have such a small hat. You won't get it on anybody's head. So just do it, yeah, gently. Don't pull too tight. So knit stitch, yarn to the back. I'm going down through the back of the loop, around, take my yarn around, and then pull it back and up, and a purl stitch, take it down, yarn around, back and up. So what you need to do now is, if you see where we started out, what I need to do is I need to put a yarn marker in here so I know where I started. Okay. Like I said, I'll always give you a yarn marker which contrasts in colour with the yarn colour that you've chosen. So I can see where mine started out. You can see where I've started knitting my rib. And here there's no rib knitted, and I've got my end. So in here I put my yarn marker in so I'll know when I've come around to that one. Okay, and every row I move my yarn marker up to the next layer that I've knitted. So what I do is I'm going to carry on knitting this in purl. Well, I've just done a purl. I'm going to be a knit stitch next, so take my yarn round to the back, through the back of the loop, yarn around, carry on and purl. And I've got to carry on in that way until this measures 10 centimeters. You need 10 centimeters of rib. It feels like quite a lot, but what we'll then do is we'll fold over that rib and knit it together so that we've got a lovely cozy band which goes around the bottom of our hat, and it feels really cozy and warm on your head. Okay, it gives you an extra layer of warmth around your ears, around the back of your neck, and it'll be a lovely cozy hat to wear. So you need to carry on, knit through the back of the loop, purl, knit through the back of the loop, purl, until you come around to this yarn marker. Then you move the yarn marker, you just pull it out just as easily as you pushed it in, and you move it up to the next layer so that you're constantly knowing where you started. That's going to be important for when we move on to the pattern next. Okay, so keep going. 10 centimeters, it'll be a fair few rows. Okay, again, if you're pulling your yarn too tight, you'll have to knit even more rows. It's not worth it. Keep the yarn held gently. It's just so that it's not loose and flopping around. Okay, just gently in your hand, and you control it that way. Keep going. Well, I'm really happy with how my rib's going, and I just thought I'd show you what it looks like when it's a little bit further on. It's a really, really well-defined rib, and it's because you're using a smaller needle. The 3.75 needles that you're using are, you know, very, very neat, and they create a very small stitch. And also, because you're doing the knit stitch through the back of the loop, it just tilts the stitch a bit so that one side makes more of a defined ridge. So it's a lovely rib stitch, and you will never have any trouble with this getting baggy, this rib. It will always stay nice and tight, so you have a lovely firm feel when the hat's on your head or wherever you give it to. So I just thought I'd show you a little bit about knitting in the round, because I set you off quite quickly, and I was thinking you probably would like to know a little bit more about how you do this. So So I've got to the point where I'm nearly around to my row marker. So let me show you. Let's finish off this row, and what you need to do is very gently ease it around, the knitting around as you're knitting. So you pull it up onto the needle you're knitting from and push it around from here. So push it around from the one where you've just put the stitches on, very gently. But what I've found by the time I'm getting here, I barely have to do it. It's these needles, these circular needles are just the right size for this hat. So it seems to be happening automatically, really. I'm not having to give it that much of a push, but you'll see as I'm doing it, just very gently, just ease it around. So I'm on a purl, knit through back of loop, purl, knit through back of loop. I'm saying out loud really what I say in my head all the time when I'm knitting. So when I'm putting together a video for something, all the time I'm saying this in my head, purl, knit through back of loop, but I say it out loud so you can understand where I'm coming from. Oh, that one fell off then. There it is in my hand. I was lucky because it was just, I just needed to purl one more. Right, so I've arrived my last purl for that circle. So what I do then is I do one knit through back of loop. Now I know that's the beginning of my next round, and then literally I push that in between the two stitches, catch a piece of wool and pull it down. So I've got it onto for the next round. And it's not so important here with this one at the moment, but in a moment when we swap to pattern, you just need to know where you're starting, really. Otherwise you could end up with quite a lopsided hat if you have more rows on one side than you do on the other. So it's never going to be that much of a problem with this, but it's just useful to know where the rows start so that you're ready for the next part of the pattern. I've knitted just over 6 centimeters here of rib. I've got 4 more centimeters to go, so keep going until you've got 10 centimeters, then stop when you get to this marker. Okay, and I'll show you what to do next. We've knitted 10 centimeters of rib, and it does look really lovely and cozy. You look, you've got quite a lot of stretch in it already, so it will be ample size to fit even the largest of heads. So don't worry too much about it. It looks quite small here. It's got loads of stretch in that rib. And you'll be very happy to know that the next row is knit. Just an ordinary knit stitch all the way around. But there is a tricky bit in this, because what we're going to do now is we're going to do something which is called turning the brim, which is basically we're making the brim a double thickness all the way around. So what we do is you get the bottom of your rib and you just turn it in all the way around so that the edge, the cast on edge, is level with the last row of knitting that you've done. So just push it in and see it better this way. So it's all turned inside. Okay. Now, a really important thing to do now is to make sure that your rows of rib are equal with the rows of rib. So the rows of rib here are equal with the rows of rib here. So if I just have a peep inside here, my first stitch that I'm going to be knitting into is a purl row, and I can look at that purl row. It's lovely. Rib is so easy to find. You see the purl row is here, and you notice there's a bit of a, on the cast on edge, there's still a bit of a step for the first stitch we cast on. So here is the start of the cast on edge, and here is the first stitch of our knit row. So what we're going to be doing, we need to be aware of that, where that is. So here it is, still the purl stitch on that side. If I look at that side, it's the purl stitch. So what we're going to do is we're going to knit the cast on edge in with this, and it means that we won't need to sew this brim in place. It'll look a lot neater as well. It will work beautifully. So let's get my knitting yarn ready to knit a stitch. Let's push this out of the way at the moment, because that's just going to get in my way. So I'm going to go into for my first stitch as a knit, and then I look behind, and you see that's the first one there. There's the first cast on stitch in this dip of the purl. So I'm going to go in through there. So my needle has gone through 2 pieces of yarn. It's gone through the first stitch in my new row, and it's gone through the cast on stitch, my first ever cast on stitch. Okay, and then I'm just going to knit. It's going to be very easy once you understand what needs to happen. So I knit, but this time I take this stitch over the top of my needle and this stitch over the top of my needle and take it off. Okay, so for the next one, okay, it looks like purl from this side, but on the other side it's a knit stitch. It's always worth looking at the back. So go into this one as if I'm knitting. I am knitting. So, and then I look underneath, and there's the knit stitch. So I've just done that purl one. This is the knit stitch here. So I go in through the very first cast on bit, that knit stitch, there it goes. Take the yarn around as if I'm just doing ordinary knitting, bring it back through that stitch, bring it back through the second stitch and pull it off. So you see I'm getting one row and it's holding in place the headband. Okay, so again here, knit stitch. On the back of this it's a purl row, so I look all the way up to the purl row here on the cast on, making sure I'm going into the right one, into here. Oh, didn't quite go. That's what will happen sometimes. Pull it through, and take it off. So here we go. We've got 3 stitches. So we'll end up with 96 stitches on, just like we had when we were doing the rib. But what we will have done is we'll have turned this border, all of our rib, into the bottom of the hat, and it'd be a really lovely cozy headband. I've already made one of these hats, one for myself, I've made one for a friend, one for one of our daughter-in-laws, and they are lovely and easy to make. This is the trickiest bit. Okay, so keep going with it. So knit, put it through as if you're just doing ordinary knit stitch. So if it's purl looking on this side, you're going to see the knit on that side. Look for the bottom of the cast on. There's the knit one. Goes through here. And I'm using my fingers to help pull this off. And then that one comes off easy and off. Okay, so 4. Go. Knit. This is a knit this side, so on the back it'll be a purl. So I'm looking for the purl one. Here it is. Use my fingers to help pull it off because it is a bit tight, that cast on edge. And there it is. Okay, So keep on going all the way around. If you really want to, you could pin this in place, but I think you're much better off. It's better off doing this by eye. If you pin it in place, you can pin it in place inaccurately. It's much better off. So looking, look, purl row this side, so it's going to be knit on the other side. It's just looking at the and lining it up. There's the knit part of the rib there. This is the one I go through. I'll pull that off because it is tight, that bottom bit, and there. So, and we're starting to have knit stitches appear here. So go all the way around. When you get around to near the end, this end, what I will do is I will undo that end so that it is it's not in a big lump. I'll show you now. Pull apart my knot. Might cut this a little bit shorter. It's not too long. It's not too long, but if yours is much longer than this, cut off a bit. You probably only need something like that. So 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters. And what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to lay it in here, tuck it away. It will get sewn into place. Push the last bit in as you do it, will get sewn into place, and then you don't need to do anything with that at the end. It's just tidied up, and yeah, a little bit of extra wool to keep you warm in the winter. Okay, so keep going. So you've done all 96 stitches, and it is a really tidy way of turning the band at the bottom of the hat. And yeah, it's simpler than sewing, I think, because you can see when you're knitting it where to line it up. If I was sewing this, it'd be harder to actually make sure that the two sides match, and you can't sew it until you've finished the knitting, really. So you'd have to knit the rest of the hat and then sew it up at the very end. So with this bit is all completed. Okay, so I'll come back to you once I'm getting near the end of this, and we'll double check that we're doing okay. Well, I don't know about you, but that was actually quite difficult. So I thought I would show you some of the ways of managing things, because I had to take out some stitches as I was going around, because I kept losing track of making sure that my rib sides were matching up with the cast on. So I'll show you how to go back if you're struggling and you need to take out some stitches. So if you need to take them out, the main thing is you don't need to worry about the cast on edge. You just need to worry about the stitches which you're going to pull out. So what I do is, if I'm going to take this stitch out, I'd put my needle in the stitch at the front, take it off and pull it out, and the cast on stitch will just drop. So put my needle in the front one, pull my needle back, pass it out, pull it out. And what I was finding is that I wasn't keeping track of where the rib was going, and I had to go back several times and thinking, oh no, I haven't done this right, let's go back. So I'm sure that you might have had to do that a little bit too. So I'm just showing you how to do it. So the only stitches you need to worry about are the ones on the top here. You don't need to worry about the cast on ones at the back. Don't forget, they're just cast on stitches. You're not going to lose them. They're not going to run backwards. And then if you need to do it again, you do it again. And I mean, you know, I've had to in patches as I was going around here, thinking, oh no, I'm losing track. The other way of doing it is, if you think, okay, here's my rib that goes all the way around, and there it is on the back, and if that seems to be going over here somewhere, and you've so it's going like that, so it's you're not in line with it. You can sort of, this one, if you're knitting into this one, you can knit sort of into the same cast on stitch as you did previously, or if your cast on row is way over here, you know, you can go and knit into over here, so you're not because this is the inside of this rib is all going to be on the inside of the hat, so it's not such a problem if you if it's not quite straight. But let's finish off my last few. Wasn't controlling that. Let's take that one back again. And this one. Two more. This one. It gets, the last few are quite tight because you haven't got much space to do it in the, because you're right in behind. That one's got stuck on there anyway. Oh. Yeah, that one got stuck. My cast on one was stuck on there anyway. So let's go through and go down there. Right, so I've gone all the way around, got my 96 stitches. Again, if any doubt, count that you've got your 96, because if you get this wrong now, then you're in a pickle once we start the pattern. So we're ready to start the main part of the pattern, the main part of the hat. We've done the brim. There's the brim, and if you feel it, it feels really cozy. That's what I mean. It's really worth doing this. It's a really lovely cozy brim to your hat. And what we're going to do now is we change from the 3.75 needles to the 4.5. They're bigger needles. Put them beside, they're wider. It will mean that your knitting will grow faster, and the stitches will be looser. They're not going to be quite as thick as this part of the hat. So what we do next is very simple. Knit 2 rows. So these needles now are going to be doing very little, and the new needle, if we're going to bring in the new needle, we don't need to swap it over, we just start knitting on it. Okay, so on the first stitch, I'm going to leave the stitch counter where it is, because there's nowhere to move it to until I get around to a whole round on my new needles. Okay, so I'll leave a stitch counter. So on here I just start knitting. It's a bit fiddly initially. Wow, the 2 points are very close to each other. It will get easier though. So it is just literally knit stitch. So push needle up to the back of the other needle and around, down and off. Push up and there, back, down and off. Okay, so 2 rounds of straight knit. Okay, so keep going. So I've knitted my 2 rows after, you know, 2 straight rows after having joined the brim. So just knit 2 rows, and then the next row that we're going to be doing is purl 1, knit 1 to the end. Okay, so it's purl 1 and knit 1 straight to the end. So we've done the purl 1 and knit 1 row, so you can just see the difference starting to show out there. You've got the 2 knit rows, then the purl 1 and knit 1. Now we're about to start pattern number 1 of the main pattern for this hat. So pattern number 1, we're about to start now. And pattern number 1 is very straightforward. So what you do first of all, it's Andalusian pattern. That's what this one is called. But pattern number 1, or Andalusian pattern, is very easy. So you knit 3 rows, so just straight 3 rows of knit, then purl 1 and knit 1, just the same as the previous stitch, and then you knit 3 rows. So very easy. Knit 3 rows, purl 1 and knit 1, knit 3 rows. So I'm going to start my knit 3 rows. So let's move my stitch marker out of the way of it. So 1, let's get the stitch marker up to the next row. So this is when the stitch marker is really important. You need to know where you start each row. So knitting 3 rows, then purl 1 and knit 1 all the way around a row, and then knit another 3 rows. So the purl 1 and knit 1 will be part of the general look of the hat, but it's this part of the pattern we really need to focus in on. Okay, so this is the knit 3 rows, purl and knit 1, knit 3 rows is the main part of the Andalusian pattern, or pattern number 1. So the last 7 rows of pattern 1 combined with the first few rows that we did in the main part of the hat will give a really textured feel to this part of the main of the hat. So those 7 rows that we've just done, so knit 3 rows, purl and knit a row, and knit 3 rows, form pattern 1. So you need to be very aware of that, because I'll refer to that when I'm writing in the pattern later, because you repeat this later on. So we've done pattern 1. Oh, dropped a stitch off the end. Let's pop that back on my needle. And we're going to start doing pattern 2 now. So pattern 2 is purl 1 and knit 1 to the end, and then purl 1 and knit 1 to the end, and you do that, repeat that 6 times. So we've basically got 6 rows of rib. Okay, so purl and knit, and then carry on doing that, so you've got 6 rows of purl and knit. So you have a big chunk of rib here in the middle. Okay, so it will look different to what we've just done. Oh, let's start off with purl. Right, so round, purl and knit, purl and knit, and we have 6 rows of purl and knit, and you have it will look very different to what we've just done, and we'll have 6 rows of a chunk of rib in the middle. Okay, so 6 rows of purl and knit, and then we'll have a look at how these 2 patterns, so pattern 1 and pattern 2, fit together to make the rest of the body of the hat. I've done 6 rows of the rib, as I said to you last time. As I said to you last time, what I said was wrong. I should have said do 8 rows of the rib. So I have done 6. I've got to do 2 more, and then we will have completed the main part of the pattern. So you can see the texture of it now. It's a very textured hat. It's looking lovely. So sorry folks, it's 2 more rows of rib to go still, and then we'll be going back to the Andalusian stitch, pattern 1, and I'll tell you where to go from there. Well, this time I really have finished the rib, so my 8 rows of rib. I've got all of the pattern done. It's just a matter of repeating it now. So what we need to do next, the first pattern, the Andalusian stitch, we need to repeat rows 1 to 4 2 times. So that means you knit 3 rows, do a row of purl and knit, and then you knit another 3 rows and do a row of purl and knit. So that's how you will have repeated rows 1 to 4 twice, and then you knit 3 rows. So it will look very similar to the bottom part here, because basically when you knitted the headband around here together, so we knitted through, remember, the stitches we'd got on our needle and the cast on stitches, so we knitted a row and then we knitted 2 rows and then did purl and knit and then started the Andalusian stitch. It will look identical to this. So knit 3 rows, purl and knit a row, knit 3 rows, purl and knit a row, and then knit 3 rows. And then we do another band of pattern 2 where we are going to rib 8 rows. So it's purl and knit 8 rows. And then we will have really come round and sort of extended our hat a long way. So we finished that part of the pattern. So we, in pattern 1, we did rows 1 to 4, 1 to 4, and then knitted 3 rows, and then we knitted all of pattern 2, the 8 rows of rib. And now we've got to repeat that again, exactly the same, repeated again. Okay, so pattern 1, rows 1 to 4, rows 1 to 4, knit 3 rows and rib. Okay, and then we'll have done the main part of the hat, and then we need to learn how to decrease when we're knitting in order to round it off up at the top. Okay, so repeat this pattern again, exactly the same as you've just done, and the hat will be well on its way to being completed. Well done, keep up the good work. So we've arrived at the point where we've done the main part of the hat, and now we've got to start to close this end up here. So it's starting to decrease. So if you haven't decreased in knitting before, it's very easy. It's much easier than some of the other things that you've done on this hat. It's just a technique to learn. So you start off, so just finished the rib, got my stitch marker, which hasn't fallen out this time, which is great. So it's very easy, I said. So all you do is you start off with knit 2, so 1, 2. Just going to move my stitch marker so that I've got it in the right place again. Just poke that one back in. So I've knitted 2, and the next one is you knit 2 together. So literally, rather than going up through 1, you go up through. So yeah, rather than going up through 1 stitch, you go up through 2 stitches. So you're pushing your needle through 2 stitches, yarn around like you normally do when you knit, and pull it out and down through the 2 stitches. Okay, so we've knitted 2 together. Do that again. Knit 2, 1, 2, and then knit 2 together. So 2 stitches, push your needle up through the 2 stitches, yarn around, it down through the 2 stitches. Okay, so it's making it smaller by 1/3 as you're knitting around. No, a quarter. My math isn't great. Make it smaller by 1/4 as you're knitting, going around. So 1, 2, and then, because you're basically losing 1 stitch in 4 by knitting it together, knit 2 together, and you do that all the way around. So knit 2 stitches and knit 2 together, knit 2 stitches, knit 2 together. Okay, so you get all the way around to here, back to your row marker, and then you will have 72 stitches on your needle. Then you just knit 2 rows ordinarily without any reduction, and then you do exactly the same again, knit 2 together, and then that will reduce your size of your number of stitches again by 1/4. It will take you down to 54 stitches, and then you knit 2 rows, and then after those 2 rows you do exactly the same again. No, sorry, you don't. You knit 1 and then you knit 2 together, so you are reducing by 1/3. So you knit 1 and you knit 2 together. What we'll do is we do the 2 lots of knit 2 together, so this one and the next one, and then we'll come back and I will do the next decrease with you. So, and it's knit 1 knit 2 together, that one, but let's focus on this. So knit 2 together, and then knit 2 ordinary rows, knit 2 together, and knit 2 ordinary rows. I finished my first row of decrease, and I've knitted 2 rows after that, so I'm ready to start my second row of decrease. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's starting to just feel a little bit tighter when you are knitting, and it's because you've got less stitches on your circular needle. So after this next row of decrease, be very aware you will need to be helping your knitting move around the circular needle, and I will show you how to do that, because it does start to get just slightly tighter, well, quite a lot tighter actually. So exactly the same on this row of decrease, so it's knit 2 together, so knit 2, let's push around. See what I mean? It's just starting to get just a little bit tighter. You've got to keep the stitches up near the end of that needle to be able to fit into it. So I've knitted my 2, knit 2 together, knit 2, and I'm just going to push my stitches around the circular needle, knit 2 together, and keep on going all the way around. Knit 2, knit 2 together, and keep pushing the stitches around that needle. Okay, so again, knit 2 together all the way around, and then knit 2 rows. As you can see, there's fewer stitches around there now. There's only 54 stitches around there, and you are just needing to push those stitches around, and the fewer stitches we have on the circular needle, the just a little bit more work you need to put into this just to make sure they're in the right place, and I'll show you some of the techniques that I've learnt in order to do that. So the next round is knit 1, knit 2 together. So this decrease round will really significantly reduce the number of stitches on there. So we've got 54 at the moment. By the time we get to the end of this, it'll be 36 on there. So knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, and keep on going. And then when you finish this round of knit 1, knit 2 together, it's 2 rounds, but I will come back to you before you get there so that I'll show you some of the ways of helping you to do this, because it is going to get tighter on these needles. So even fewer stitches on the needle, only 36. You can see how wide space they are in places, and you just have basically just got to keep pushing them around as you're knitting. So I've done my decrease row, knit 1, knit 2 together, and I'm just about to start my 2 rows of knit. So first stitch, let's put my row marker in here. So as I'm knitting, just keep having to push the stitches around there because there's so few of them on there, and it just means you're going to be stretching the wool too much to get them up over the end of the needle. After you've knitted a few, push the stitches around and push a few more up onto the needle that you're knitting from. It means you'll knit the round very quickly with so few stitches on here. I do keep having to stop to push those stitches around, and after the next decrease I'll show you another technique when you've got even fewer stitches on there. Okay, so keep on going, 2 rounds of just knit. So circular needle is fairly groaning with the lack of stitches on it now. So I'll show you a way of how to carry on knitting on it, but still not sort of overstretching your knitting. So again, I'm back to the knit 1, knit 2 together. So my 4th decrease. At the end of this, I'll only have 24 stitches left on here. So will you. So a way of doing this on circular needles, just so it's not so much pressure, is if you look at the side, you've got your needles here, look at the side opposite your needles, just choose a bit between 2 stitches and pull the circular needle out so you've got a loop starting to appear. So what you've done is then pushed your knitting up onto this side, over onto this side a bit more, so you can still knit, but you've got this big loop. So it's all very well until you get a bit closer to that loop, and I'll show you what to do in a moment. So knit 1, knit 2 together, just like we did on the last decrease. So knit 1, let's move my row marker before I go any further. Knitted 1, knit 2 together, knit 1. See, it's much easier to do at the moment. Knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1. Looks like I've run out of stitches, but I haven't. They're just all on this side of the circular needle. So, and see how few are there now, really not many. So again, I go to the other side, I pull a loop, so I've got a loop sticking out. I'll push the needle back in here. I just knitted 1, so knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1. That's got the end of those stitches again. I turn it. Got so few stitches on here now. I still haven't finished this decrease row yet. So I've got another loop out of that side. I've just done a knit 1 on this side. I'm actually not even going to do that. I'm going to pull 2 loops this time. So you learnt I've got to think about it as I'm doing it. So I'm going to pull that loop there. I'm going to pull another loop here. It just means that I can actually bend my needles a bit. 1 loop there and 1 loop here. So I've got my 2 loops, and then I can actually cross my needles because I wasn't able to just now. So I've just done a knit 1, wasn't it? Knit 2 together. I'm virtually around now. Knit 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, knit 2 together, and I'm back at my stitch marker. So very few stitches on here now. We're really closing the crown of the hat. It will look beautiful, it will look wonderful, but it is a few rows where it's harder to knit just because there's so few stitches, but you haven't got many stitches, so it's not so much of a problem. So again, I'm going to pull a loop here, and I'm going to pull a loop on this side as well. So that I can manage to knit, because at the moment there's so few stitches on here. I'm going to struggle to knit if I can't get those 2 knitting needles to cross. So 2 rows of just straightforward knitting. Hey, says she. Not so straightforward when you've got to constantly keep making these loops to make it work. So only 24 stitches to go though. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, a third of the way through. So turn it, pushing the stitches around all of the time. I'm going to make another 2 loops, 1 here and 1 over here. I'm going to try and keep my hands on that loop so it doesn't fall out like it did last time. I've done 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 9 to go. Feels a bit like this at this stage because it is just getting a bit tricky to do. So I'm going to make a loop here. It's up to you, but I'm going to try and see if I can get my 9 stitches done. So I'm going to make my other loop by the stitch marker. I get all my last 9 stitches done, so 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So one row done, another row of knitting like that, and then our final decrease to come. Just about to start our last row of decrease, and you can see how small the circle of knitting has become. I've only got 24 stitches left on here now, and the last row is going to be knit 2 together all the way around. Okay, now you will have found you've got to make these loops in the circular needle in order to be able to knit at all now, and to be able to do that once it's reduced to 12 stitches is going to be interesting. So what I suggest is you just leave a few stitches on the needle you're going to be knitting with. I'm going to do 4. Leave 4 stitches on there. Make a loop with the circular needle wire just after those 4 stitches. Another loop. 2, 4, 6. Seems we're going to be knitting in 2s, and knitting 2 together, you might as well make sure you've got enough to be able to knit 2 together. And I've got my 2 loops in my circular needle. Push those 4 stitches on my right hand needle, the one I'm knitting with, up towards the end. I'm not even going to bother moving my stitch counter now, my row counter, because it is literally getting back around to that one now. So we only have 12 stitches left on the needle when we get here, so it's 2 together. So needle through 2, wool around 2, 1 stitch, needle through 2, wool around 2 stitches, wool through 2, wool around 3 stitches, needle through, wool around 4 stitches, needle through 2, wool around 5 stitches, needle through 2, wool around 6 stitches, needle through 2, wool around 7 stitches. So done 7 of the 12. I need to do some shuffling around here now. So I know I've knitted 7. So if I leave 4 of those 7 on the needle I'm knitting with, and make a loop, and then the other 3 that I've just knitted, I leave them in between the 2 loops, and I should be able to get it all done in the next go. So I've got 2 loops here, push the stitches up onto my needle. It is getting tricky. I will really agree with you on that one. Push them up onto the needle I'm going to knit with, untangle my wool to make sure it's in the right place for knitting. So I've done 7 of the 12, so 7. Needle through 2 stitches, all round 8. Needle through 2 stitches, all round 9. Through 2 stitches, all round 10. It's 2 stitches, all round, 11, do 2 stitches, all round, 12, yay! So, you really see it now? That tiny little hole that I've got left. It's starting to disappear into nothingness. Okay, so the next job is to sew up this hole. I have got that much wool left, hardly anything. So brilliant estimation by me, yeah. You depends on how your tightness. You might be knitting a little bit looser than me. You might have needed to start your second ball of wool that I've put in your pack. If you don't need to start a second ball of wool, now that you've done this hat once, you can do it again for somebody else as a present. It's very lovely. I've given them as, I think it's 2 Christmas presents I've made these for, and very appreciated. And I with this tweed effect wool, I think it even looks even nicer than the ones that I gave. So I've got too much wool to be sewing up with. I don't need that much. A very small amount needed for here, so I'd say 20-25 centimeters in length. I'm just going to cut the rest of the wool off. So I'm being very frugal, not wasting hardly any wool here. And what we do now with this wool that we've got left is we feed it through the stitches. So I'll pull the knitting needle through, because I'm still working on, you know, sort of my next stitch that I would have sewn. So I don't need to be knitting. I'm not going to be knitting with it though. Okay, so pull them all up onto the needle that I would have been knitting from. Let's turn it around. I can take this stitch marker out now, so I don't need to worry about where the end of my wool is. So I've got, don't worry, it's going to look a bit loose at the beginning, but it will soon be fine. So all I'm doing is lying my wool across the end. So there it is. It's coming from that end, because that was the last stitch that I sewed. I'm bringing it around to the beginning again and just lying it over the end of my needle. I'm just going to, so it's like that. I might actually just make life easier for myself and for you. If I pinch it then in my left hand, with my right hand, you can easily use the other, it might be easier to use the other needle, and literally just lift it over the top of that wool. So 1 stitch has been lifted over the top of that wool, 2 stitches lifted over the top, 3 stitches lifted over the top. Oh, that's no good if I let it come off the end of my needle. I've just managed, I was lucky I managed to grab hold of it before it went back through all the stitches. If you don't worry, start again. And I've dropped one of the stitches off of the needle as well, which is not going to do. So let's do it. So I've got that one there. I'm just holding on to the tail of wool through those fingers. So I think it was 4 I counted, wasn't it? 4. This one over the top. 5. This one over the top. I'm going to pull that one back so it doesn't come off. 6. This one over the top. 7. This one over the top. 8. This one over the top. Let's pull this. It's starting to feel a bit tight now. 9. Turn it around a bit, make life easier. This one over the top. hem, the top, 11. Oh, I miscounted just now when I said number 5. It must have been number 4. This one over the top, so another 11. And this one over the top, 12. So I've ended up with just that one stitch left on there, and it's the end of this piece of wool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to gradually make that stitch bigger and bigger and bigger. What I'm doing is I'm pulling the end of the wool through. So I've just got one. I'll get rid of my needle now. Don't need that anymore. So what I've ended up is I've made a circle with all the stitches on one piece of wool. I can just pull that tight. So it's really closing up the middle of the hat. And what I do now is, because this is the right side on the outside, in order to sew it up, I'm going to sew it on the wrong side. I'm just going to thread my needle. I don't know if you saw how I did that then. Wool around the needle, pinch it tight with my thumb and pointy finger, and push that through there. That's through the needle. And then, first of all, I'm just going to put my hand inside my hat. I can see where the hole is. I'm going to close that hole so that it is got a lovely warm hat with a hole on the top of my head. So just pulling it tight, it's going to go in over this side of the hole, like that. And then I'm just going to pull it, my hat, the wrong way in. So I'm working on the inside now. Pull the thread through. I'm still pushing my hand on this side so I can really see. I want to make sure that it is fully closed. And I'm just going to go do a few turns across it. So I'm just going across that hole a couple of times, just to make sure that it's fully shut. Yeah, that's shut now. I can't see anything. I'm pushing my finger over the top of it. I can't see my finger through. Then just to make sure it doesn't come undone, because if you think about it, if this comes undone, the whole hat goes. Only one ball of wool. So 1, 2, 3 in one place, and then I'm just going to go around here, just weave it backwards and forwards through the stitches a bit, because it just secures it even more if I go around. I just go in and out of one row of stitches, not pushing it through to the other side, so this will be invisible. Right, that's enough. Pull it so that it's stretched as much as it's going to be. That end, and then go as close, like cutting into the hat. Done. Turn it in the other way. And there it is, finished. Well done. If you've managed to do that, you've really challenged yourself. Looks lovely. Ready to wear, ready to give as a gift to somebody. Looking really good. Lovely slouchy beanie hat, which will look good on any head. Well done. Whenever we're knitting, it's always easy to, spot, like if a stitch falls off at the end of a needle or something like that. But when you've made a mistake in the pattern, it's not quite so easy to spot. But I was knitting away on this, just starting to do my next lot of rib when I realised that something didn't feel right. And what it is on this hat, one of the easiest ways to spot a pattern is that the knit stitches in rib are knitting everything, if you see what I mean. So if you look here all the way up these stitches, this knit stitch has been knitted all the way up, right throughout the rib, knit, 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 until this one where I've purled it. And I realised something was wrong, so I then had a look back to see where I'd made the mistake. And this one's wrong in a knit column. This one's wrong in a knit column. Got a purl here in a knit column, and then purl here in a knit column. But this one's right, so I've got a knit stitch here, and you look all the way down and it's been knitted all the way down. But what I've done is there I've knitted two stitches side by side, so it should have been knit purl, and I did knit knit. So the easiest thing to do to get back to here is put my needle on this side into the stitches one at a time and pull out the yarn that's knitted them. So literally going backwards, but rather than ripping out the yarn, it saves me having to pick up all the stitches afterwards. I'm going into the stitch underneath with my needle, just literally poke it into the stitch underneath and pull out the one that I've just made. Poke it into the knit stitch here and pull out the stitch I've made. The purl one here, poke it in, pull out the stitch I've made. Here, put it in, pull out the stitch I've made. Nearly there. Poke it in, pull out the stitch I've made. Here's my two knit stitches side by side. Poke this in, pull out the stitch I've made. So I'm in the right place to start going forwards now. So this one's correct all the way down, knitted all the way down. So this is my purl stitch, purl, knit, purl, knit, and so on. So it is a matter of recognizing the pattern, and by recognizing the pattern in the knitting that you're doing, you can see where you've made a mistake. If you suddenly realize that you've dropped a stitch and the stitch is unraveled down through several rows of knitting, it's not the end of the world, it's not a disaster. When you're knitting in a pattern, however, you really need to understand that pattern in order to put this correctly back as it should be. Now I'm knitting the first row on this one. It's the first row of the rib. So on this side, it's the last row of the knit 3 rows. So here's the stitch that's come out. I've got it, I've got hold of it now. So it's not going to pull it out enough that it's not going to unravel another layer, another row. So I've got to realise where I'm starting with here. So I've had 3 rows of knit. So 1 row of knit, 2 rows of knit, 3 rows of knit. So there's my 3 threads. Okay, 1, 2, 3 will be knit stitches. But I've got a 4th here. Before I get to the stitch, there's the 4th stitch. the fourth one, and that will have been in this row where it was knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, or purl 1, knit 1, whichever it was. So I've got to look along this row to see whether this was a knit or a purl stitch. So the purl ones have always got this sort of bobble on the stitch, the thread that goes across the front, and the knits are just all loops. So I've got a bobble there and all loops for a knit here. I should have, yeah, all loops for a knit, and then a purl stitch there. So this is a purl, the one that's come undone. So that tells me which side the thread has to be. So that means that this thread here needs to be in front of the stitch for me to pick it up correctly. So I've pulled it to the front of the stitch, put one of my needles through the stitch, and then what I'm going to do is, using my thumb, I'm pushing the thread up underneath the needle, and with the needle I'm literally going to pull it around backwards. I wasn't going to catch that time. Actually, what I'm going to do an easier way, I'll put that thread on top of the needle. There you go, thread's on top of the needle, and there's the stitch which was loose behind it, and I need this to be a purl stitch. So in order for this to be a purl stitch, this stitch has got to come over the top of that thread in order to make one of those bobble stitches, or correct name, purl stitches. Okay, so I put it over the top, and I've got that bobble, so I've got my purl stitch in the right place. So all the rest need to be knit rows. I think knit rows are easier to do. Purl stitches are harder to pick up. Knit rows are easier. So in that way, I'm going to take my needle out of the stitch, turn it around, put the next, you've got to be careful if you've got like this, look, three rows of knit, you've got to make sure you take them in the correct order. So this is the lower one, so this is the one I do next. So I put that over my needle, and I take this off the end of my needle to make a loop. And the same here, put the next thread on my needle, take my stitch over the top of that thread in order to make a loop. One last one coming up. Here it is. Take it over the end of my needle to make a loop, and then put this stitch back on that other one. And yes, look, so I've got 1, 2, 3 knit stitches and a purl. So I'm back where I should be, thank goodness for that. The other thing that keeps happening to me in this pattern is my marker keeps coming out. I don't know why. I probably need to swivel it around the whole way round, and it would be much more secure. It won't come undone. But whether it's me knocking it as I'm knitting or whatever, it keeps doing that, and then the next thing I know, it's on the floor at my feet because it's literally just come off like this, and it's usually on my lap or on the floor at my feet. So if that happens, where do you put the marker back in? Now, before we did the turning of the brim, that was easy because we could see the loose yarn that we'd knotted up from where we'd cast on, but now we've got no clue down here because that's tucked inside of the brim. The clue we do have, though, is again going back to the pattern. At the moment, starting I'm starting doing the rib. Okay, so I've done 3 rows of knit and a rib. just started. I'm halfway through it. Now, if this one came off now, that is off. This one came off now. In lots of ways, it's really easy because I've just done a knit row. So I've had a load of knit stitches, and then the first stitch of the rib is purl, purl knit, purl knit, purl knit. So this row is going to start with a purl stitch where everything else has been knit. So you can see around here all knit stitches, all knit stitches, all knit stitches, all knit stitches, all knit stitches. There's a purl. That's the first purl. Let me just double check. It's the first purl. So that has to be where the row starts. So I literally pick this up, put it in there and back on. Okay. Now, if it had come out 1 or 2 rows ago when everything was knitted, because we've got some purl stitches in some rows, it's very easy to count the number of rows you've got. So if you look here, there's a purl, there's a purl. Okay, so to count the number of stitches above, okay, the one with the purl bar across, I don't count that because that's a purl, but I've got 1, 2, 3 knit stitches. So the purl one is the one with the bar across. Don't count it. 1, 2, 3. Now, let's suppose it was 2 rows ago. On this side, I should have had 2 rows of knit, straight knit. Okay, each row would, every stitch in that row would have been knit. And on this side, I'd have only had 1 row because I've got to come all the way back to here before there's 2 rows of knit. So on this side, I would have seen the purl stitch with 1 knit stitch on, and on this side I'd have seen the purl stitch with 2 knit stitches on, and that's how I would have known where to put my stitch counter. Okay, stitch marker. So it's by looking at the pattern which helps you to realize any mistakes that you've made.